Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this Monday program. We have a fascinating speaker today and an important topic, which is very timely. My role is to just give you a quick update on where we see the situation in this war. Everything is about the war with Iran, including the focus on the Gulf states, the energy markets. This is really an international conflict now, not just a regional one, and certainly not only involving Israel and the United States. Europe and America are in deep crisis of trust, which is very significant and will be significant to ELNET operations in the future. The assessment right now, when we're already in week 5 of this war, there was initial assessments that this would be shorter, but there are some that now are talking about June and maybe June through September. This is a very significant crisis. America put 15 points on the table. It's unlikely that the regime in Iran would accept all or part of that. There is a mediation effort, but it doesn't seem to be too significant at this point. And you're all hearing President Trump say very clearly that if the ultimatum expires within 10 days, and that's, I think, by next Monday, all hell breaks loose, including oil, electricity, infrastructure, desalination, and so on. So we'll hear a lot about that today. But the bottom line for us is that Israel's in a multi-frontal war. The war with Hezbollah and Lebanon is very serious, without easy solutions, as you can probably assess from the headlines. The war with Iran is without easy solutions. Now the Houthis are involved in the Horn of Africa, the Red Sea area. So it's significant with many moving parts. And the working assumption should be that this is nowhere near over, unless there's a tweet again that will surprise all of us and declare an end. But that's hard to see that happening right now. So a lot to discuss today and unpack with implications for Israel, the Middle East, and transatlantic relations. So without further ado, Mark, our moderator, the floor is yours to introduce our speaker and the topic today, please.
Thank you, David. As everybody knows, Wednesday starts Passover for Jews around the world. It's the story of the Jews' deliverance from Egypt. And for 3,000 years, Jews have not looked back, not been about just delivering from, but delivering humanity to something better. And there have been throughout history times and visions that have sought just the opposite, to hold us back, to hold humanity back. Today's conversation is the colliding of visions as we see them today. And there is no one better on the world stage, as far as I'm concerned, to have this conversation, to explore these issues, than Hussein Aboubakr Mansour. Hussein is a fellow at Jinta's Gurmunder Center, where he focuses on the intersection of Arab politics, Islamist movements, and regional security architecture. But that doesn't do him justice. He has an uncanny ability to examine current events through their constituent parts: politics, culture, social and political philosophies. And those are the social and political philosophies that breathe life into these cultures. He has the ability to think and explore and write at levels that few can match. I recommend that all of you on this call, if you're not already doing so, read his Substack called The Abrahamic Metacritique. And also, if you really want to get a masterclass of what I view as two right now intellectual titans, listen to the podcast he had last June with Haviv Reddit Gore on Haviv's podcast, Ask Haviv Anything. It is what I call mind-blowing. And when I jokingly refer to it as the unifying theory of everything, because you walk away with such an understanding of where we are today because of that conversation. So let's get into it, Hussein. I'm really looking forward to your thoughts on what we're going to discuss today. Clausewitz once wrote that war is politics by another means. But I think that's the end of the chain. Politics is defined by the culture of that political system. And culture is defined by the social and political philosophies of that time. So if we're going to predict where we're going to go today, I think it's important for us to understand how we got here. And even to understand what we got here, we have to recognize it didn't just happen yesterday. It didn't just happen 10 years ago. Those of us who've been tracking this for, a couple of decades know it happened long, long ago. So what I'd like for us to spend a little time today at the beginning is to understand these three colliding visions. What's interesting is these three colliding visions have placed Jews and Israel at their core. And they have found great utility in the weaponization of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism for their causes. The first is Islam. The second is the Red-Green Alliance. And for everybody on the call, that is the consortium of leftist groups, third worldists, neo-Marxists, nihilists, and Islamists. And then, of course, we have what's relatively new on this stage, what you call critical Christianity, and what I've been calling Christian third worldism. So I'm going to read something that that you wrote, and I'd like for you to take it over from here. You wrote, political radicalism in Muslim societies is not an eruption of atavism, nor the natural expression of Islam. It's the downstream effect of a civilizational breakdown, one in which Islam, as a normative order, was first hollowed out, then politicized, then reassembled as an ideological instrument in the vacuum left by failed attempts at Western mimicry. That's quite a sentence. What did you mean by that? And why is it relevant to us today?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Mark, for having me today, and thank you for the very generous introduction. I hope that today I do any justice to your wonderful expectations of me. Well, as you said, in order for us actually to have a better vision, I mean, predictability is a much difficult issue. But in order to have a clearer vision of what seemingly to be a increasingly chaotic and immune to penetration or understanding a vast chaotic developments that you see all the time. People talk about this all the time, from the idea of a leftist queer person cheering on Hamas, raping Jewish, like completely incomprehensible developments, completely incomprehensible political development. As David said at the beginning, you have major crises that are happening all at once, including in our cross-Atlantic relationship between the US and Europe. There's, of course, the historical crisis of liberalism, which is actually real. I mean, everybody, post-liberalism has been a major topic of debate for the past, I think, decade or so. You have massive transformation of the international order and the way that the international order behaves, international levels of investment in international norms and international institutions. You have a lot of questions about the future of the United States and democratic societies. And of course, for Israel and the Middle East, you have a massive upheaval that started really with the Arab Spring, that really we've been going through various cycles of transformation. So it's very clear that we're living through momentous times in what they are changing. And in order for us to actually have because of how chaotic it is, how difficult it is to grasp, that so many parts are moving. I think it was very important to actually try to have a better understanding of the past, of what happened, and to revise ourselves. We have to admit that our narrative, we're basically living at a moment in which you have your narratives breaking down. We have a lot of narratives explain our world, and a lot of them fail to do so. And one of the most important things that I was trying to achieve is actually try to understand the Middle East and the developments in the Muslim world, because these developments, obviously, the Middle East specifically has been, in the post-colonial era, has been one of the most troubled regions in the world. The revolutions, upheaval, the rise of international terrorism. It became kind of not a hub, but even the producer of weird ideologies and forms of nihilism and violence that were really unimaginable to a lot of people. And exporting this outward, not just miring these societies in deeper cycles of chaos and civil wars and terrorism and so on, but also exporting it outward to the extent that you had, of course, with the Arab Spring, which was really a turning point, kind of a crisis, an inflection point to a lot of these things that are happening. While you had a massive eruption of events that really transformed world politics. Just remember that the Syrian civil war resulted in the rise of ISIS, which is a major historic event in its own right, in the way that it transformed really our relationship with security, with religion, with the internet, and so on. And of course, the very large waves of refugees that ended up completely disrupting the EU and European politics, which had then also ramifications on North American politics, and so on and so forth. And I don't want to go through it, but basically so the Middle East has been this very problematic, ununderstandable a place for a long time. The Jews and Israel have been at the center of this. It seems to be this resistant obsession with making the telos of culture, religion, politics is to destroy Israel. And there's been a lot of answers trying to actually find a way to manage this. Why is it this way? And there are various ways to answer this. Scholars have developed really institutionalized answers. So you have one answer that mostly on the left, that basically this is because this is the consequences of colonialism and imperialism and European rule, as well as American control of the region and Zionist occupation. So the reason that the Middle East is a failure, and largely, I mean, with the exception of the recent rise of the Gulf, the reason that it's so unstable and it's producing so much terrorism and violence, it's really Israel, Zionism, American policy in the Middle East. And this answer, by the way, you'll find in mainstream media like that. You'll find this being written in various forms in the Washington Post, in the New York Times, for example. One of the editors of the Washington Post, Shadi Hamid, he talks about this all the time, that just the mere presence of Israel is a reason that democracy fails across the Middle East. And of course, you have it established, really institutionalized in the academy, has been for a very long time. And it's a weird logic, but it's if you follow it, it's really morbid. I mean, it means that if there is no democracy in a country, let's say like Algeria, and that somebody like me gets arrested and tortured by the state, at the end of the chain of causality, it's really Israel that caused this. If the Hamas people are throwing homosexuals from the rooftops in Gaza, well, actually, they are doing this because of the occupation. It's actually the distortions that Israel or Zionists, so on and so forth. So this is one of the answers. Another answer has been, of course, the relegation into a primordial cultural force, which in this case becomes Islam, that it produces this. But anyways, so you have all of these institutionalized answers. I never found them satisfactory. They just do not, no matter how much you stretch them, they don't explain the level of insanity that we've seen, let's say, on October 7th. They don't explain the level of lunacy that we've seen coming from the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is a fanatical lunatic state that we're trying to get nuclear weapons, vowing to use those weapons to actually erase Israel completely. And it does not explain the relationship of the world with these things, such as the relationship with the Western University that now seems to have this erotic attachment to this level of madness and terrorism. And I had to re-examine this afresh and anew. And ultimately, the conclusion is that really our narratives don't work because they are mostly not true. Islam, whatever it was at the 19th century, I can't even say what the nature of Islam was. It's over and it's not coming back. There was a civilization framework that survived for centuries, but it couldn't really bear the weight of the modern transformations that happened very rapidly, especially in the early 20th century in the Middle East, and it completely collapsed into various components and then symbolic and aesthetic forms, and then various early generations of modern Arabs and Muslims tried to reconstitute it and build it, use it primarily continental philosophy and European ideas and German ideas primarily, and ended up reinventing or trying to rebuild modern Muslim and modern Middle Eastern culture in using these ideas, which ultimately resulted in a lot of the forms that we see: the nihilism, the obsession with anti-Semitism, the revolutionary fervor that keeps to be escalating without the ability to ratchet it down. And a lot of these ideas then becomes embodied or came to really their peak or their fruition moment in the Islamic movement in the Islamic Republic of Iran specifically. And this is the reason also that you have people on the left, whether intellectuals, whether philosophers, everybody have to remember that, funny enough, the theorist of queer theory, Judith Butler, a literary critic from UC Berkeley, from San Francisco, have called Hamas and Hezbollah a part of the global progressive left. The reason that this is happening is because of this affinity indeed does exist. Now, all of this is a historical background. I'm not stuck in the past. Like, I'm not really living in, and I feel.
Let me pause you there, because I want to make sure that I think everybody's making the connection here. I remember you saying that in the formative years, let's say Hassan al-Banna, 1928, so you're going back the 20s to the 40s, obviously World War II, communism and fascism, both failing European ideologies. I remember you saying the Islamic world inhaled these failed ideologies from Europe. Now, while the Islamic world inhaled these ideologies, the ideologies in Europe just didn't disappear. They sort of evolved in different ways and created what we call the left today. So they're ideological cousins. Is that what I think you're saying?
Yes, that's a very good way to summarize it. They broke down, but components of them. That's the thing. There's a constant. So modern history, since really the end of Christianity as a dominant, the dominant organizing force of European or Western societies, you really had cycles of composition, attempts to build alternatives that ultimately compose, and every cycle composes to components that then themselves go into building something, the attempt to build something else. So yeah, communism and fascism didn't really collapse. I'll give just an example. Marxism, very rare if you find it's actually quite endearing if you find a real Marxist anymore. Even most of the people that we describe today as Marxists and neo-Marxists, the reason that we say neo-Marxist, post-Marxist, so on, because they're not really, because it's not really believable anymore. Nobody believes that, there's a wheel of history that's running on class struggle dialectically, and then the proletariat is really the carrier of that historical consciousness, and they make a final revolution. Like, nobody believes that story anymore. It really collapsed already in the 50s with the loss of faith in Stalinism. But then it had so many components in it, including anti-capitalism, including the ideology critique, the ability to critique every single thing of modern society, your literature, meaning, religion, theology, to show its oppression. So here is that component survived, right? The entire full framework collapsed, but you have components of it survived and then went into the academy that does other things. I wanna clarify also something important for mostly an American audience. A lot of the confusion about the Islamic Left Alliance or the Green Left Alliance comes from the confusion of between the American understanding of what being progressive means and really the continental meaning, or really the Marxist meaning of being a progressive means. Americans understand in liberal terms that progressive means more rights for everyone. You're trying to civil rights, feminism, so on and so. That's not what progressive. Okay, this is what progressive means in the United States, and the United States here are historically meant in the United States, and that's an exception. Progressivism meant before or since the Soviet Union, both in the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc and the entire Third World, meant to be on the part of the global revolution against capitalism in the United States. That's what it meant. It did not have this right understanding of an individual rights. That's not it. It was the commitment to a certain struggle in history. And that creates, I think, a lot of confusion for people. So to go back very quickly to the point, yes, it's ultimately then we're talking about ideological affinities, ideological cousins. That doesn't mean that they are entirely in harmony with each other. For example, most of the left today does not have a positive vision. That is, the left used to have positive vision. Like communism used to be a positive vision of the left. Obviously, it's collapsed, and it's a lot of most leftists know it's not really possible. So it doesn't have a lot of positive, it's a lot of negativity. Most of the left today, think about what is the leftist activities primarily: debunking, deconstruction, critiquing the patriarchy. That's most of what's done, but there is nothing positive really to offer on the table. Now, of course, the world of Islamism and Middle Eastern and Arab and Muslim radicalism inherited all of this. So it has that negativity. It's hatred for Israel. It's hatred for Judaism. It's hatred for Jews. It's hatred for the West. It's hatred for the United States, so on and so forth. So it has that sheer negativity that is expressed also very violently, but it still has delusions, positive delusions, that they can build, let's say, an Islamic state, that they can have an Islamic republic, right? That's a level of positive delusion that the left had 80 years ago, but doesn't have today. So what I want to say, they are cousins, but they are still different.
Well, I think we've seen the Islamic Revolution was an
Right.
indication of how they kind of team up. The cousins will work together
Right.
until they turn on each other, right? The
Exactly.
lefts sided with the Islamists, and they got the Ayatollah, and which then turned on the leftists. And you see the leftists now marching in the streets demanding for the Ayatollah to come back. So this is certainly nothing new. I think for those of us in this country, it's becoming pretty obvious, and it's more of a new phenomenon. I'm going to read something you wrote because I think it's pretty powerful. The left supplied the language the Muslims had always lacked in polite society. What Hamas filmed as a religious ecstasy, jihad, conquest, humiliation of the infidel, the left translated into resistance, liberation, anti-colonialism, decolonialism. The massacre of festival goers became, quote, armed struggle against occupation. Jihad was no longer medieval, it was intersectional. And I think that's, if we can see this, we had in one sphere, the evolution of radical Islam that we're seeing start in the Middle East, make its way and hijack these leftists certainly now in the US, but certainly across Europe for a period of time before it made it across the Atlantic. And we're seeing it here. And we're seeing now this red-green alliance making Israel and anti-Zionism its raison d'etre more than anything else. Where do you think this is going in this evolution with the red-green alliance?
Let me say, okay, let me actually try to do something very complex here. That actually should be done essay, but and I don't know if it's tricky to do on a kind of on the spot, but I'll try to do it. What's going on today is the interlocking of various levels of major struggles into one axis of Israel and Zionism. But they are actually there are different things happening at the same time. This is why this is very complex for a lot of people. This is why we reach for mystification, try to find some final explanation. And it's anti-Semitism at large, right? Because yeah, it's true, but then because you really the complexity is so enormous. Like, how do you explain the university? Tucker Carlson, a right-wing a pundit historically, all of this on the right, on the left, the Muslims. How do you explain? It's too complex for a lot of people. So let me try to actually give some conceptual order to the level of complexity. That it actually, there are different things that are happening that all of them happen to intersect together or meet each other on the issue of Zionism in Israel. So at the just the pure, let's go to the meta level, just philosophically and theologically. You have massive breakdown of various systems of belief, right? You have that massive, religion has already, for a lot of people, in its traditional sense, has lost meaning for a very long time, tried to reconstitute that meaning with various systems of ideology, including, by the way, modern Islam itself is post-Islamic. That is, the theological categories, that's what I'm trying to say. The theological content behind its symbols have already died a century ago and are tried to be reconstructed using philosophical abstract language. And this happened to everything. Critical Christianity, you mentioned it, or, it's my attempt. You can call it anything. Christian identity politics. It's not real Christianity. There is no Christ in this. Like, there's no Christianity as people understand it, from the days of the evangelicals, right? People who come to talk to you about your personal relationship with Lord and Savior Jesus. That's not it. Even that is gone. We're now talking about something that looks like Christianity, uses the symbols of Christianity, expresses itself in the aesthetics of Christianity, but behind it, there is a system of power and identity, and so exactly like something that Edward Said would do. So basically, you have all of these systems of beliefs and meaning collapsing, and thus they are colliding on Israel and Zionism and Judaism in general for various reasons. But at the core of this, and this is a much complex issue that I did write about, that actually Judaism is the primary meaning mechanism of the modern world. That is, Judaism is actually, since it's the origin of Islam, it's the origin of Christianity, Judaism is ultimately the real final meaning-making mechanism, and that's really what's being attacked. So that's just that's just an abstract level. So, and this plays out in the university. This is what's actually at the core of the writings of Edward Said. I'm actually always bored by people who focus on the activism of Edward Said because he didn't really understand what he was talking about. So that's happening. Then on the actual material, forget about the ideas. On the actual material level, you have massive transformations of technology and power regionally, internationally, so on. Regionally, you have failed states and they have rising states. Now you have states like Qatar, tiny states with enormous resources that are trying to compete over influence in the Middle East. And one of the best ways you can do that is weaponizing mass ideology. And the most effective tool to do this is anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And they do that in order to compete with the Saudis and compete with the Emiratis and compete with others over influence. Turkey, it's the same thing. So basically you have regional power competition for whom, first of all, Israel is a threat. That is, Israel is a competitor and that no one can defeat, and everyone knows that they can defeat. That is, Israel has military superiority. So the best way to not compete with them is actually to make them a pariah, make them entirely outside of the structure of Middle East politics, and you do that by bringing up the fact that they are Jews and accusing them of occupation and so on. So there are instrumental reasons why several states in the Middle East do this. And then you have transformations happening in the United States itself. You have a power struggle between between both the right and the left, and then you have power struggles inside both spheres. So you have a power struggle inside the left between, let's say, the old Democratic Party, for which, by the way, Jews were a central component, and which supported Israel, and then a new Democratic Party that is organized around the Saidian figure, the Mamdani figure, right? The third world elite migrant who's now can put himself right at the center of this institution, the Ilhan Omars and so on. And they want to displace the Jewish component that was really at the top of that liberal democratic institution. It was really at the center of it, part of its elite. They want to displace it and take its place. That's, for example, what Said did in the university, right? Mamdani became the mayor, I remind you, of the most Jewish city in America. So this is a power struggle happening in the Democratic Party. And then you have now a similar one happening in the Republican Party. So you have the MAGA movement coming to power. And then you have the rise of a core who want to displace the Jewish conservatives who recently rose to power. This is also a historic development that nobody talked about. The rise of Jewish conservatism into actually the core of power of the GOP. This is a historical thing. The fact that one of the main forces that turned the tide against the Democrats were people like Ben Shapiro, Dennis Prager. These are very influential people. Trump has major Jewish donors. So basically, you have now this core of Jewish influence inside the GOP, and then you have now a team that's rising, trying to take their place. You can see it in the special rancor that is targeting Ben Shapiro by other pundits who clearly want to take his place. That's basically what's happening. Now we have this is happening on the right, inside the right. You have this happening on the left. Then they're happening also between them both. And then you have then the power struggle that's happening in the Middle East that then can tap to each other. So Qatar can see that this is happening and they are competing already in the region. So they're going to come to America and recruit within both. So they pay the universities to empower the leftist anti-Zionism. And then now we know that they are 100%. I mean, we don't exactly have, we have a FIRA form from the Tucker company, the Tucker media company that made the interview with that. So we know that this is happening. They're also now interfering in what's happening on the right. But they actually are there are multiple different things happening at the same time, right? There is a
Well, what's interesting here is, and I want to place it right there is virtually no difference between Tucker's language and use of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism and George Galloway in the UK, who is a leftist Islamist, right? He's sort of the kingmaker of the Red-Green Alliance in the UK, who uses the exact same language. So it really is quite fascinating. That is, I guess, the definition of the horseshoe theory.
Right.
And I want to transition a little bit because you invoked Qatar. You didn't use this language, but I'm going to use it because I know this is how you describe it. Sort of the strategic competitive advantage of Qatar is
Right.
its ability to influence narrative across the academy, across the media. It really is its strategic strength. Now,
Right.
so I want to go to kind of the present and transition to the Middle East and get some of your thoughts on this. You wrote a couple of articles, one last June, where you essentially said that the Arab countries will not align with Israel even after an Iran attack.
Right.
You kind of modified that earlier this year where you said Abraham Accords, forget it, bad idea. I'm wondering in the context, and I want you to go through what you think each of these players' competitive advantage is so everybody understands kind of where they were prior to today. And do you think that those competitive advantages are changing now in a way that makes the future a little bit more hopeful, for a lack of a better word? Are you as adamant that the Abraham Accords are dead and that the Arab countries will not align with Israel,
Right.
or do you see things differently now?
Okay, let me put just more details so people exactly understand what.
Yeah,
So I'm not saying the Abraham Accords are dead in terms of the treaties that were signed, namely
right.
between the UAE and Israel. No, that's going to continue. The
Mhm.
Abraham Accords that's dead is the Abraham Accord as an idea, as a framework for a new Middle East, and that was the fantasy, right? Everybody remembers when the Abraham Accords were signed, there was this vision that this is the future of the region. Saudi Arabia is going to come sign the Abraham Accords. Other Arab countries and Muslim countries are going to come sign the Abraham Accords, and this becomes the foundation of a new regional order and a new institutional infrastructure that finally makes regional cooperation possible and brings peace and prosperity and so on. It's an amazing, amazing idea, very utopian, but that was the idea. For a lot of that is what is dead. That's what I insist people have to wake up. That this is the Abraham Accords in the actual real sense that happened. These agreements between Bahrain, UAE, Morocco, and Israel that happened within a set of conditions internationally, regionally, on the back end of the Arab Spring. The threat of Iran, the threat of the Muslim Brotherhood throughout the Arab Spring that was still at the time. You had, of course, Trump in the White House in his first administration after 8 years of a terrible Obama presidency, especially for the Middle East. There were several reasons or conditions that came together that made it possible at that point. These conditions are over. We now have very different conditions. What I talked about in last June, and that was during the 12-day war. That is also when the strike started, people speculated, okay, this is it. Iran's going to be taken down. That will remove the barriers that Arabs had to actually for freedom of action. And then naturally, the freedom of action will lead Saudi Arabia to pick normalization with Israel. Now, all of these were built on assumptions that I don't know actually if they are actually realistic at all. So what I tried to say that actually it's likely to run the other way around. That is, what was bringing Israel and the Arabs closer, especially Saudi Arabia, was the very Iranian threat that made their cooperation important. That made the Saudis need Israeli security. We need Israelis to be stronger. We need Israelis to check the Iranians. We need Israelis to protect us if we need to from the threat of Iran. Once the threat of Iran goes away, that completely transforms every single relationship in the region because of just how important the Iranian threat for the region has been for a very long time. Everybody calculates everything. For the Saudis, then, Israel is no longer a potential asset. Now, Israel is a competitor. That is, Iran is out of the picture. Now, Israel is a very powerful country. I don't have Israel's power. We can't compete because they will win. So I need to find strategies to contain them. And that's actually what started happening in December. As a matter of fact, they started this very competitive. They completely pivoted from the paradigm that they had before, started becoming confrontational with the UAE, started unleashing a great media narrative against the UAE and against Israel. And my own understanding is it's the normalization trajectory of Saudi Arabia is actually over. The Saudis are not interested in it. They interested in their own influence in the Middle East, and they see both the Emiratis and the Israelis as a threat. And there's a question about the accuracy of their vision. I actually think the tragedy here, and that's my fear, that the Saudis may put themselves on a tragic trajectory by a complete misreading of Israel and what Israel is doing. Now, the Qataris have been playing this game for a very long time, as you said, and they've built a strategy. First of all, we have to give the devils their dues. Qatar turned out to be one of the most shrewd countries in the world, and it built the most influential strategy of any small state, likely in history and certainly in modern history, maybe with the exception of Israel. And in an amazing level of success that makes such a tiny state, even with all the natural gas that they have, to be the central of the conversation, whether in Western capitals, European capitals, or in the Middle East. Now, this strategy was built on various components. The first one of them is having a close relationship, of course, with the U.S., hosting a Laudet airbase, and at the same time having a close relationship with the U.S. enemy, Iran. And that way they can hedge between both. Now, of course, this is breaking down currently, but that was the strategy for a very long time. The second part of that strategy, patronizing Islamist movements all across the Middle East, including Hamas and terrorist movements and so on. And that gives them what they lack because of numbers. They simply don't have the networks. They don't even have enough people to send as diplomats to all of these countries. It's a really tiny nation. But by patronizing all of these Islamic movements, you have extended yourself, right? You've basically built yourself long arms that reach everywhere and can influence eachwhere. The third is mediation that then you can talk to everyone America can talk to. And the last one was the narrative control. And that ended up being, all of this, by the way, it happened piecemeal. But this is how it ended up, the constellation of power that they ended up building. Now, narrative control happened in the Middle East through its most famous device, is Al Jazeera network, that ended up being the primary mover of populist impulse in the Middle East. And then in the West happened gradually through the patronizing of prestigious institutions, primarily higher education, and also media institutions. They pay a large sum of money. Qatar, that tiny state, is the largest foreign donor for U.S. university systems, and Europe, by the way. But I'm much more knowledgeable about what they are doing here. You have entire centers, very important, that are entirely paid for by Qatar. Namely, their main, the tip of their spear in that regard, for instance, in their academic operations, is Georgetown University. Now, why Georgetown University? Well, everybody knows why. Georgetown University is the most important diplomatic school in the entire world. It graduates actually the largest number of U.S. Government official from a single university. The diplomatic corps, a lot of them come out of a lot of the State Department people come out of Georgetown. So this is the government school, the intelligence community, and they have huge investment through their Doha campus that controls, especially the Middle East Studies Department. For example, they have the Islamic Center Studies Center that's entirely controlled by Qatar, and they put in it all of their Muslim Brotherhood people. Now, throughout these arms, look at what you're controlling here. You have the university, you have professors, you have the media. So I'm gonna close by telling you how the cycle works now. It's very easy, and it works like this in Washington. So, a Georgetown professor who is Muslim Brotherhood and have very close relationships with Doha, makes a research. Georgetown published it in a peer review important publication, saying that actually the worst problem in America right now is Islamophobia, and shows you like data studies that shows you that actually Islamophobia is rising and likely because of Zionism and Jews, and completely fabricated. By the way, like these studies are complete lies. Completely fabricated, but he's a professor at Georgetown, distinguished one, and is publishing it through this. Then another part of the Qatari network, let's say a civil society organization, let's say CARE, takes that report and then goes to that Capitol Hill and goes to Congress members. Hey, look at this report from Georgetown University. What are you doing about this? And then the Qatari media networks will pick up this report and this story and then spread it. So basically, you end up with this amazing sphere that produces its own fact, and it's able to circulate them at a very wide, both politically and on a populist level. And that is today one of the main sources of Qatari power that they built.
So how do you think this the Qataris' position has changed, if at all,
Right.
because of this war?
Well, I don't know. Okay, their position structurally changed. I don't know if they changed their. I'm trying to read. I mean, it's not clear how they are going to deal with it. So first of all, you have a breakdown of some of the core tenets here, because of the what seems increasingly like impending collapse of Iran. First of all, the Islamic Republic empire did collapse. Like that is gone and is not coming back. Now we have an IRGC state, and it's a question of, is it going to remain or not? And I think it's all the reasonable people saying that we should pay whatever cost it costs to get them out of there. But regardless, the idea of having an Iran that you hedged with is completely gone. And that means now you're threatened as a small country by Saudi Arabia. The main imperative of Qatari foreign policy, by the way, I forgot to mention this, is actually to confront Saudi Arabia because they are tiny. Saudi is huge. That's their biggest threat. They are afraid of being absorbed and made subordinate to the Saudis. Now Qatar is out, Iran is out. That puts them at that risk of being subordinated to the Saudis. Just very quickly, in 2017, when the Saudis led the blockade campaign that tried to strangle Qatar, it was a major event. They had, I think, 7 points requests. One of them is the shutdown of Al Jazeera entirely, handing them all of the Muslim Brotherhood fugitives, and they blockaded the country, and they even threatened it with invasion. You know who saved Qatar from this? It was Iran. Iran.
I thought it was I remember it. Wasn't it also the Biden administration who demanded that they.
The presence of the U.S., of course, made it, but it was Iran where they were able to actually fly through and have trade with, because everywhere around was closed. The airspaces were closed. All of the Gulf countries basically located Qatar. So Iran was a strategy to hedge against the Saudis. Now that strategy is gone. It's not coming back. That is gone. So the question is, what would the Qatari do? A second problem, that the collapse of the Islamic Republic, and my monthly essay at Mosaic Magazine last month tried to explain this. It really signals a change of an epoch, or a different stage in the history of political Islam and Islamism. That is, the Islamic Republic was the proof of concept that Islamism can work. We can produce an Islamic state, and it can survive even with sanctions and war from, with half of the world. Now that is ending. And that means Islamism as an asset is depreciating regionally. I mean, this has been going on for a while. ISIS, even you see it in Syria. Here you have a really committed jihadist who went through Al-Qaeda, ISIS, then left them. And he basically left a lot of these traditional jihadist and Islamist models, and now they are managing this weird Syria that is a nation state, but still pseudo-Islamist to some extent. But that shows you that basically the Islamist model as it was, as that total idea of a total Islamist state, is really depreciating. That means their ability to influence people and patronize movements is going to decline. So they are in a crisis. What they still have, of course, is their influence networks. That's still there, still very powerful, still there in the Middle East, still there in the US, still there in Europe. They have, of course, an alliance with the United States. How are they going to shift their strategy to maintain their power and autonomy from the Saudis, and independence? It's not clear. They could go. I have written something on it in Substack, but I'm writing something more extensive also. They could go various directions. That is, they could basically try to reach some sort of an alliance with the Emiratis, kind of swallow their pride and work with the Emiratis to be a balance against the Saudi influence. And that will make them tone down, try to control more the Islamist elements they patronize. That is one option. Not necessarily.
That would be a rather large pivot on their part.
It would be a large pivot. It would be a very positive one, and I think they can do it if they want to. The question is, are they calculating that they can get more by doing something else? And I suspect that they are. I suspect that there is a way for them to get out of this again on top by utilizing more even of these networks. And this brings me to a very important point, is that as Islamism facing its terminal crisis in the Middle East, Islamism is rising in Western society. And
I was just about to ask you about that, so I'm glad you pivoted on your own.
Not a form of alarmism. There are a lot of people who completely misunderstand these things, and they say these things in a vulgar, alarmist way that actually harms the issue, as if we're going to wake up tomorrow and find ourselves living under Sharia law. That's not how it works. That's not how it's going to work. It's much more complex than this. We need to actually take this seriously if we are to confront it. We have large Muslim populations now, second and third generation Muslims, in every single major Western city. A lot of them are highly educated. Really, their platform that they have been imitating was really Jews, the success of Jews in the West after World War II. They have been actually looking to that. Look at, for example, CARE, that styled itself almost identically to the ADL, and they even say it out loud. They tried to build something similar to the ADL. We're talking about successful people who are now lawyers. They understand Western legal systems. They understand democratic systems. They have money. They don't even require foreign money anymore. They actually raise their own funds now. You have this, sadly, is happening at the same time. You have a moment of a political breakdown in the liberal establishment that can't actually even defend itself against these ideas. And we're seeing it happening in the Democratic Party primarily, and of course in a lot of green parties in Europe. In which these Islamist movements are not just, it used to be an alliance. By the way, it's no longer an alliance. They are now at the power core of a lot of these establishments. And that's a big problem, because how are you going to fix this? How are you going to roll this back? How are you going to, because you must do this in order for you to deal with the demographic problem. Like it's the cascading problem is extremely difficult to deal with. And this is why we need to take it seriously. But this brings me back to Qatar. If I was the Qatari decision maker, I understand, no, the salience of Islamism is growing. It's not declining. It's declining here, but it's growing in the West. And that's what I need in order to empower myself here. So I'm going to actually bit more on them. Now, second thing, and this is my dark prediction, that means anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism will become even more important. That is, as all of these power struggles, what I just described is an intensification of a lot of power struggles that are happening on different dimensions simultaneously, and that all of them intersect on Zion and the relationship with Zionism and Israel. So as these power struggles intensify, the value of anti-Semitism as an instrument goes up. So the investment in it will be more, not less. And that's my darkest prediction for the coming years. That the anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism will become even more important politically. So we're likely to see them more being intensified.
All right, so you have an audience of people who've devoted their lives to combating anti-Zionism, we'll say, right, to bridging relationships between Israel and Europe. Right. With respect to ELNET, and obviously there are Americans on this call, and many of them are involved in the U.S.-Israel relationship as well. We have all committed our lives to ensuring these relationships flourish. What is your advice then? How do you address what you just laid out from a policy perspective?
Right. So what I just described is a world becoming much more dangerous. And this is my announcement. Actually, I believe I worked on it for a very long time. The world is becoming a much more dangerous and unpredictable place. And the Jews at the center, Jews and Israel are at the center of this. And I think there is an awareness now, deep awareness amongst a lot of parts of the Jewish world that this is the case. The question that you asked is a survival question. And it has two components. So I want to separate them. So you have the security aspect, you have the material aspect. That's we're talking about money, resources, strategic partnership, weapon systems, intel. We're talking about real protection, right? The ability of Israel to actually protect itself from the threats materially. And this is where the works of people like ELNET matters a lot, because it reaches policymaking level and decision-making level in order to try to smooth these things. And there is, of course, the superstructure level, or basically then the non-material part is. So I'm going to start on the material part. I think already Israelis know from my analysis of Israel. Now I gave you my analysis of the Middle East. Let me tell you what I think is happening and the Israelis are doing, and I think they are absolutely right. I think Israelis understand, the Israeli government understand that this is what's happening globally, and they understand that this is a new difficult chapter in their history and the Jewish history. And if they are to survive it, the way to survive it is to actually make Israel itself indispensable to the security of and the survival of American power. And I think that's a great vision, and I think that's exactly what's happening. That is, Israel has to become a very useful and very important and very central partner for America to protect itself from, because it's becoming a dangerous world for everyone, not just you. It's a more dangerous world for everyone, including America. Now, in order for America to actually maintain its place in this increasingly dangerous world, America needs strong allies, reliable allies. It needs loyalty. It needs various things. So the Israelis, I think this is where they are heading. They understand that this is what's going on. So your best bet, how are you going to survive all of this chaos, is to make your own self actually indispensable to American power. So to ensure that America will always, have
Europe.
And
I mean, European, obviously, Europe, yeah.
And Europeans, of course, but Europeans here becomes a question because the relationship even between Europe and America is troubled.
Yeah.
And part of it is part of the Islamic left thing that's also now at even a much larger scale has been happening. I mean, we've seen since the beginning of what's really was heartbreaking seeing at the beginning of the war is that it showed, at least me, very clearly that there is something deeply, deeply unwell in British politics. Like, it's very clear that there is something that really has been broken, and I don't know if it's going to be fixed. But to go back to our point, yes, I think that's what needs to be done. Israel needs to be, in the most material, military, strategic sense of the world, just indispensable to Western security. And I think that's very important. And I think the Israelis can do that. We're talking about intel capability, technology, AI, missile systems. So basically, in order to have a decision maker, let's say in America or in Europe, even if they don't like Jews, they can't afford not having their alliance. You see what I mean? I think that's a right direction. Now, parallel to this, and it's as important, and that's the more difficult one, is actually to try to defy this wave of propaganda and hatred and insanity, and to actually help Western societies remember who they are, so to speak, by offering Zionism and Israel itself as a model of the best of what the Judeo-Christian tradition, what Western civilization actually can produce, its best vision. So and this is already happening also on some level. I think there's intellectual Jewish awareness of it, that Jews can offer a vision for now a breaking down post-Christian Western societies about how to reconstitute themselves. I think there's still an attempt. There are failed attempts, there are good attempts, but I think this is very important. It's already successful with certain sectors of American Christians who starting to understand the real importance of this bond for the survival of a Christianity, for the survival of the family, for the survival of just the shape of society that was built on these Judeo-Christian values. So those two things, I know I take so long to explain what my opinion is, but those two things have to go in together. The military, the power, the success, the intel, this must be indispensable to the West. The West has to be in a position where they cannot afford not to stand with Jews because they actually need them. At the same time, the cultural and intellectual push to actually fight this battle.
I think you said that beautifully. And, I think what you were describing goes to, supports what I said earlier, that the social and political philosophies that color the culture ultimately create the politics.
Right.
And so our work to broaden these relationships between Israel and, in our case, European countries, there is a strong correlation. It's not 100%, but there's a very strong correlation between the relationships that any given country has with Israel also is an indication of how their relationships with the Jews in their country. So when we see these deep strains publicly between Israel and a European country, there's no surprise that there are deep tensions within the Jewish community of that country as well. So the deeper we can make these relationships with European countries, we think it'll help Jews across the countries as well, across Europe. You gave us a lot to chew on. So I am going to say thank you very much, Hussein. I think this is an ambitious conversation. You handled it well. I'm going to include Larry Hochberg, who wants to ask a question. I noticed that Tom just left, but then after Larry and after you respond, I'll turn the floor over to Tom for some closing thoughts. But spectacular conversation. Thank you.
Spectacular is correct. Thank you, Mr. Mansour. It gave us many aspects we should think about. We know now nothing will really help that the Israelis can do, or probably the Jews, to make the Muslim Arabs be willing to accept things the way they are. We deal in Europe, as Mark said. Which of these objections do you think are the key excuses on the ground today that for the hatred that exists against Israel and Jews? First is Israeli success. Second is a complete destruction that happened in Gaza. And three is Israel instituted the right of Jews to live and move into Judea and Samaria, which is the West Bank. Rank those as things that may be actionable in time as things cool off.
No, I think if you ask people in the street, they will give you number two. Most of people, they'll give you number 2 and 3. But I think 2 and 3 are perceptions that are produced ultimately by number 1. That is the reason that you would see Israel as a monster who went into Gaza, destroyed it, and killed children and drank their blood, is that you completely have a distorted narrative and understanding of the events that was ultimately produced by a level of blind hatred and prejudice towards Israelis. If you also your focus, you think that the problems of the Middle East, the reason that the Egyptians failed to achieve democracy in the Arab Spring is actually because of those people walking in Judea and Samaria and building their homes and settlements and so on. You obviously have such a very distorted version of reality, understanding of reality, but that's what people say. That's what the New York Times would say, by the way. But obviously, this was produced. It's a profound distortion of reality that was produced through the mechanisms that ultimately produced by number 1, which is obviously you have a very bad view of Jews in Israel. But the thing is that they are always the trick to deal with them, that they are various times removed from these mechanisms. But that's how I see it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now I'd like to welcome Tom Flesch, ELNET chair, to offer some closing remarks.
Okay, thank you very much, Larry. Those great questions. And Hussein, I have to tell you, I really admire you. I admire your fortitude. I really think you are really a Passover miracle story of what you've endured and what you had faced with your stand against anti-Semitism, with the problems that you had with the Egyptian authorities, which ultimately led you to political asylum in the United States of America in 2012. And your continued work is so much appreciated, and your voice is very, very loud. And I'm just thrilled that our audience got to hear it from you today directly. And thank you so much. I want to also, from our board of directors to all of our listeners, I just want to say thank you so much for what's going to be a very meaningful Passover. And as we realize that we may have the same Seder, the same order, every year it takes on a different meaning based on what our experiences are and what the world political climate is. And so it's an ever-evolving part of our lives, and it's very much a part of our history. We are grateful to our listeners for the loyalty and support. You make it possible for us to continue our vital work in educating future leaders and influencers that benefits all of us. In observance of Pesach and Easter, we will not be having a briefing next Monday. I just want to just wish you all again a very meaningful and hearty Pesach and a big Hag Sameach. Thank you.